how did you just get quieter? Thank you for joining us. I'm Maya Trabulsi. International Day of Democracy is recognized every September. The month also marks 1 year since the launch of Public Matters, a partnership between KPBS, Voice of San Diego, and iNewsource, and a lot has happened in the past year. To discuss that, I'm joined by KPBS Public Matters investigative reporter, Amita Sharma. Thank you for joining us, Amita.
Oh, it's good to be with you.
Voice of San Diego CEO and editor, Scott Lewis.
Hello.
And iNewsource managing editor, Jamie Self.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. And 2025 has been an eventful year politically. President Donald Trump was sworn in for a second term. His administration immediately began implementing policies aligned with a conservative blueprint called Project 2025. A new Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, was announced, aimed at reducing government spending by facilitating mass layoffs and dismantling government agencies. The president also cracked down on immigration, with many of his orders being challenged in court. So that is a lot to unpack. Amita, I'm going to start with you. The question, we're going to have a clip first, but the question is, your reporting included an entire series on the impacts of Project 2025, locally especially. One story showed how federal funding cuts have hit local government agencies and universities, and we're going to show a clip of that before we get to the question.
So far, President Trump's executive orders on federal funding have canceled grants at UCSD that fund pandemic, HIV, and AIDS research and intimate partner violence. At least 50 researchers have been notified their funding has been disrupted. UCSD infectious disease Dr. Davy Smith says the United States biomedical research infrastructure is being changed.
How we fund research, who's reviewing the research, what we can say in our research. I really have to point out this is censorship when you can't talk about certain groups of people or demographics or how you include or not include various individuals within research.
So Amita, what has the impact of your reporting been that you can tell us?
Well, I'm just going to focus on the science end since you just played that clip, and I want to reiterate what was said in the piece. When I last checked in, I reported that President Trump's executive orders on federal funding had canceled grants at UC San Diego that dealt with research in HIV, AIDS, and pandemic study. It also dealt with intimate partner violence research. In addition to that, 50 researchers had been notified that their grants were also being disrupted. Well, since then, a federal judge in Boston restored that funding, saying that President Trump had overreached. And despite the fact that the Supreme Court has since overturned that Boston judge's ruling, the National Institutes of Health, known as NIH, has not made those cuts. So UCSD has gotten a reprieve, and I'm calling it a reprieve, even though the funding has been restored to the research that I just outlined. I'm calling it a reprieve because the next federal budget hasn't come out. So the situation on the ground at UCSD is still shaky. Mm-hmm. If Congress decides in this next budget to allow President Trump to set the agenda, to set the spending priorities, then they are back to square one. It's deja vu all over again, and those cuts could be restored. So there's a lot of uncertainty in the air.
Indeed, there is. Now, Scott and Jamie, I'm going to turn to you if that's all right. What have your reporters uncovered when it comes to the local impact of these federal policies? Scott, would you mind starting, please?
Sure. Well, I think there's a list of winners and there's a list of losers, and the list of losers is a lot longer. There's obviously all the impacts to the universities, to the researchers. There are winners in the defense industry. There are a lot of investments being made there, and in the hiring and funding of federal enforcement officers. But I think there's also a list of businesses struggling with the tariffs. There's a lot of cross-border activity and commerce that is being wildly disrupted. And I just heard from hoteliers as well, people in the tourism industry that are looking forward over the next year and seeing a real catastrophe in the number of people coming to San Diego. And the industry supports a lot of jobs and governments here.
Jamie, what about you?
Sure. So, two big things. One, the cuts to SNAP and Medicaid, that those have taken place, and what we see locally is something that I think we see across our local agencies that depend on federal funding, right? If the money is cut at the federal level, then it's incumbent upon the local government to figure out if they are going to fill the gap, if they're going to meet the need. And so right now we have San Diego County looking into how they're going to fill the need of folks who depend on food assistance and also Medicaid. So that's a huge kind of domino effect that we see. We've also been covering closely immigration enforcement. And of course, one major shift I think we've all noticed this year is the enforcement ICE arrests in very public places, right? We have ICE arrests that are near schools. And often they are arresting parents of children who are part of those school communities, and that's just incredibly visible. I was reading a statement from Homeland Security that came out earlier this month where they were saying we are not enforcing in schools. Well, that may be the case at this point, but when you arrest people right outside of a school and the school community sees it, then it becomes something that everyone is noticing. We also saw that in South Park, right? There are a number of examples I could highlight, but I think the South Park example, it was on a weekend, broad daylight, you had heavily armed and masked agents coming in, making an arrest, and then of course it blew up into the national spotlight, and we had Homeland Security officials criticizing the local response. And so I think that is a notable shift that we're seeing develop this year. If you look into the data, which we've been doing, you also see increased numbers of arrests, detentions, and despite the Trump administration's insistence that they are going after the, quote, worst of the worst, right, criminal offenders. If you look at ICE's own data, it says that most of the people in detention do not have criminal histories or pending criminal charges. They have immigration offenses on the record, which could be something, illegal entry is considered a civil immigration offense. And so I don't know that a lot of people really understand those trends, but if you look in the data, that's what you see. And with what has been a historic injection of cash into federal immigration agencies, we can most likely expect to see this trend develop over the course of this administration.
Thank you, Jamie. Now, Amita, your reporting has gone beyond the local landscape. You've talked to experts across the country, and you were getting a gauge on the state of our democracy through them. What have they told you?
Well, I'll just start with the most recent interview that I did with UCSD political scientist Barbara Walters. She actually wrote the book How Civil Wars Start. She's working on another book on what the world looks like, post-democracy. But I asked her, what stage are we in? How is our democracy doing? And she said that we are in a high-risk zone called anocracy. And what that means is we have elections, people vote, but we have a president with few checks on his power. What that also means is that party affiliation, the two major parties in this country, is now centered around race, religion, and ethnicity instead of ideology.
So if you could just answer this next question for me, what have you found about the past year that's shaped people's views about the government, and more specifically, how they feel about political leaders?
Well, I would say that it's very much aligned along party lines. So if you talk to Republican voters, they're very happy with what has happened so far. Many of them have said that they are pleased with the ICE raids and the subsequent deportations. They are happy with reining in universities. They're not so bothered by troops in the streets in Los Angeles or DC. And they don't really mind the cuts to Medicaid or SNAP benefits. If you talk to Democratic voters, they are very, very unhappy with the president's agenda over those same issues, but they have an added layer of dissatisfaction with their own party leadership, who they believe is not sufficiently countering the president, with a few exceptions: Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, California Governor Gavin Newsom, and some others.
Thank you, Amita. And we asked our viewers to submit their questions for our panelists about the state of our democracy, civic engagement, and the cost of living. Here is one of those questions. Is there any thinking that we as a country are moving onward but forgetting or negating the initial focus of founding fathers regarding focus, values, and morals? Amita, what would you say to this viewer?
I would say that Democrats, citizens, voters, anyone who is interested in preserving American democracy has to come to grips with the fact that there are tens of millions of people among us who are not so sure that democracy is working for them. And I am not solely referring to white Christian nationalists who want a white Christian nation. I am talking about everyday Americans who struggle daily to put food on the table, pay rent, and educate their children, pay for their children's college education. They do not believe that either party is serving their interests. Some of them don't believe that democracy itself is serving their interests.
Jamie and Scott, would you like to expand on that question from our viewer?
Well, going back to the founding, there was a lot of weird stuff that went on, right? Like we went through periods of political violence that really make this one look pretty minor. That doesn't mean that it's not serious. And when you have threats to free speech, when you have universities being cowed into, deciding not to do certain things, when you have a president openly musing about running for a third term despite the constitutional prohibition on that, you do start to wonder, like, have we crossed over into a new paradigm? But I think we have gone through a lot of stuff after the invention of dynamite and the anarchist violence of the early part of the 19th century or 20th century. That was a scary time for a lot of people, and we emerged from that. And I wonder, what we can take from history and recognize the polarization we've seen in the past, and remember that what unites us is that politics and democracy is how you share power, how you live together without violence. And as much as we might be frustrated by it and not delivering for us or whatever, the alternative is violence. That's the alternative to politics and democracy.
Thank you so much. Shifting gears to our next topic now, the Documenters. It's a program by iNewsource powered by the community. Jamie, can you tell us a little bit about how that works?
Sure. In case anyone watching us right now needs a little bit of hope, I hope that this delivers it. Yes. So the Documenters is a program at iNewsource where we train and pay community members to attend public meetings. And there are, of course, hundreds of public agencies that meet regularly. They're meeting throughout the year, and for the most part, there's no one there who's paying attention, right? No community members who know they're meeting and know what business they're taking up, and certainly no media. We do have a pretty robust media community in San Diego, but even with what we do have, there are so many meetings that do not get coverage. And so the documenters sends community members to these meetings, and we say they get the quotes and the votes. And they write down what happens, and then those notes become tips for our reporters and also reporters at KPBS, which has joined our growing news collaborative, and some other news organizations in San Diego. And so we're looking for partners because, you know, the notes are step one, but getting those tips to reporters so that we can write the stories and get them out to people is certainly an important part of it as well.
Yeah, truly an important program, and we actually have a clip from one of those stories now.
For decades, many San Diegans have enjoyed trash services for free, but that changed in 2022 with the passage of Measure B. The city hosted meetings across each council district to hear from residents. And with the help of our San Diego Documenters program, iNewsource attended nearly all of them and spoke with attendees. While some said the meetings were helpful, others wanted more information, especially how much they pay and how lower-income residents would be impacted.
And that was a portion of a story by iNewsSource reporter Crystal Niebla. So Jamie, tell us, what are some of the biggest things that iNewsSource learned through this program?
Sure. So the clip demonstrates one of the great benefits of the Documenters program, sending people out to cover these community meetings and then bring back what residents are saying and what they're concerned about. But there are other ways that the program has been extremely helpful. The Documenters have actually surfaced very important accountability stories. So one example, a documenter was reviewing a City of San Diego Rules Committee agenda and noticed that there was an item on the agenda to discuss doing away with virtual public comment. And so we wrote a story about it. The meeting was the next day. The next day, people showed up and they protested, and there was much more media coverage that second day. And so, you know, if a documenter hadn't been looking at the agenda, how many media might have attended that Rules Committee meeting? I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball, but that is the power of it. The documenters have also surfaced. They uncovered that there was conversation in a city meeting that no other media attended about an employee on the city payroll that was getting a six-figure salary but wasn't actually ever budgeted. So the officials were asking, you know, what's happening here? We're adding this position. It's like, well, we're making it official. Was there something, you know, corrupt? Was there some kind of, you know, intentional misleading effort on behalf of the city? I don't think so. It appears to be a mistake, right? But we can help uncover those things if we're just in the room. And so I think it's just another example of how powerful the program can be.
Yeah, can you give us another example, Scott, about how the impact of covering these smaller government meetings is to the public?
Yeah, sometimes you show up as a reporter at a meeting where they haven't seen an investigative reporter for a while, and everything changes. They watch what they say, they do a better job explaining things to people. And I think that's cool and it feels good, but it's also alarming that it's gotten to the point where so many agencies and so many public meetings are just the people that are so unaccustomed to, you know, reporters being there, and so to go and to shed the light on it is a really valuable prospect.
And it makes you wonder what is happening that we don't know about,
Yeah.
because there's so few of us.
Yeah.
So now we want to hear from you. You can submit your questions about local government and a democratic process in the comments or using the link that you find on your screen. Many of our viewers have already submitted some questions, including James Dupuy. And James Dupuy asks, what steps can be taken to ensure honesty in politics, and how might the public penalize a politician for falsehoods? So Jamie, would you be able to answer this question for us, please?
Sure, that's a great question. I spent many years covering politics in the South, and I could easily be very cynical, but I don't want to be cynical about this. I have children. I want them to grow up in a world where the discourse is honest and productive. I really do think that the key to solving this problem is accountability and also community, right? Community starts in our home. It starts in our social groups. It starts at the workplace, and then more broadly into the more public arena. And so I think that, we need to be honest with ourselves about how our own biases are driving our perspective of the world. And we need to be willing to hold public officials accountable when they're not telling the truth. And at the same time, we need to be able to hold space so that public officials can admit when they're wrong, right? Admit when they're misleading, because sometimes they make mistakes, right? And we need to be able to acknowledge that and move on in a healthy, productive way. Of course, none of that matters if we are all operating under different sets of facts. And so I also think that, media literacy is incredibly important right now, especially as we move into more AI technology across all of our platforms. It's going to become increasingly important that we have serious conversations about what the forces that are shaping our realities and how they're so very different. I know in my own family I see this where, people who interact in a family structure just have very different views of the world and what's happening. And so I have offered them, this is my little solution privately, I have offered that if they see something online and they want to know whether it's true, they can send it to me and I'll do my best to fact check it and email it back to them, and I have actually gotten some requests, and it has kept that information from going on Facebook, for my family member. And so any way that we can engage in that kind of conversation privately and publicly, I think should help us. I hope it does.
Thank you so much, Jamie. And now we're going to move on to our last topic. It's one that looms large over our region, and it is the housing crisis. The issue of housing, from affordability to a lack of space to build new homes, is top of mind for San Diegans. Our Public Matters Partnership looked into where homes are being built in San Diego County, what kinds of homes are being built, and the impacts that has on neighborhoods. Here is one of those stories.
A new analysis by Voice of San Diego and KPBS looked at where exactly housing is being built. The supply of new homes, it turns out, varies widely from city to city. From a pure volume standpoint, San Diego, the largest city, builds the most homes. But we crunched the numbers on a per capita basis from 2018 to 2024. We found El Cajon permitted the least, just under 10 homes per 1,000 residents. In all of San Diego, one city built much more than the others. That was Chula Vista. It built 38 homes per 1,000 residents.
And that was taken from a report by Voice of San Diego reporter Will Huntsberry. So Scott, what are the biggest takeaways from the In Whose Backyard series?
Well, at the core of it is, where are we going to build homes? This community has always struggled with this growth that we seed with our universities, with our industry, and then this reluctance that a lot of our neighbors and neighborhoods have to actually see more homes get built. And so both seem to win out, and so we end up with more jobs, but not enough homes for those folks. And we're at one of the worst versions of that cycle in our entire history in San Diego. So when we looked through it, the numbers were incredible. Like he said, in El Cajon, they're just not building homes, and the mayor's like, we built a lot before, and maybe if somebody wants to change a shopping center or something into homes, we'll support them, but we're not really worried about it. We found a really interesting thing. Encinitas has had a fight with the state for years over wanting to restrict and keep housing from being developed. The state has threatened them over and over that they have to allow housing. Turns out Encinitas is on track to allow and build as much housing as they're supposed to. Coronado and Imperial Beach, on the other hand, have not constructed one single affordable unit over the last 5 years that we analyzed. And these are two very different cities, sort of similar area, but it just shows that the reluctance to build housing, that the neighbors fight against it, and the politicians' response to that is still very powerful. But we are in a crisis situation in the sense of at least an identity situation for this community. We are heading towards the first time in many decades where San Diego's population will peak and will reverse and go down over the next 10 years because families simply cannot afford to have kids, raise them here, or want to have kids and raise them here. And that's going to change the dynamics of San Diego, I think, going forward.
Yeah, and speaking of kids and childcare, Amita, housing is a top issue for many voters, like costs for groceries and childcare. You've talked to voters across the political spectrum. What have they told you about how these budget items impact how they feel about politics?
Well, they are anxiety ridden. I mean, they, like all of us, have seen the cost of everything go up. In the last year, in San Diego alone, food's gone up 4%, housing has gone up 5%, healthcare has gone up almost 7%, childcare has gone up more than 9%. Unemployment is up. So everyone's finances, at least the lower class, the middle class, everyone's finances are strained. At the same time, unemployment is going up. So the economic indicators don't look so great. We may be at the start of an economic downturn. We're already seeing signs of that. So there's a lot of uncertainty coming up.
Jamie, of course, housing is also a very important factor in the cost of living. What are some things that you're looking into right now?
Sure. Our federal impact reporter recently reported on the removal of an exemption from paying duty on imports if they're under a certain amount of money. And so this is an exemption that that we all didn't know that we love so much, right? We probably didn't even know about it. But it kept the cost of online shopping low for us. And so Trump has done away with that exemption. And so we're very interested to see how that impacts communities in San Diego, especially small businesses that might rely heavily on that exemption. And I think also just locally we're looking at parking, right? And fees and the ways that local governments that are cash strapped can make up the difference and fill the coffers.
Thank you so much for that, Jamie. And I think, Scott, actually, we're going to ask you that question. We have a little bit of time.
Sure. Yeah, well, we haven't even talked about gas. The cost to insure, park, store, and drive a vehicle is very high. Public transit's being cut back at the same time. It is the cost of living here is the single biggest crisis I think that San Diego leaders are going to have to deal with. And if they don't effectively deal with it, then people are going to continue to leave, which will cause even more financial problems for them, and schools too. We've seen people and schools struggle to maintain enrollment, and that portends bad things for potential controversies to close them.
Yes, well, thank you so much. And I think that's a great place for us to end on, and that concludes our main program. We'd like to thank you, Amita, so very much for being with us.
Good to be with you.
Thank you, Scott Lewis from Voice of San Diego, and Jamie Self from iNewsource for joining us. And for our online audience, KPBS social media host Jake Gata will join our panelists to answer more of your questions. You can watch live on any of the major social media platforms at KPBS, and you can find more of our stories at kpbs.org/Public Matters. And for our television audience, thank you for joining us for this Public Matters Forum. Have a great rest of your day.
Welcome back, and thank you for joining us. I'm KPBS social media host Jake Gatta. We asked our viewers, listeners, and readers to submit their questions about housing, democracy, and local politics. If you have questions you haven't submitted, be sure to do so in the comments below, and we'll answer them as they come in. But let's get straight to it, starting with this one question. So, can you make a comment about the fact that this is all rental housing which doesn't afford people an opportunity to build wealth? Again, this is talking about our housing series. And Scott, if I could go to you, do you have a comment on how a lot of this housing that is being built is going up as rental housing?
Yeah, that's actually a big thing that the builders talk about too, is there was some laws that made that a problem as well. They would build these condo complexes that were for sale, but then inevitably, almost 100% of the time, there would be what was called a construction defect lawsuit. And that caused them such worry about building for sale housing that they would first do rental and then maybe eventually convert them to for sale or condo conversions after that time for the lawsuit has passed. And so there's some reforms to that. That should be done. There was a new complex opened up downtown that was all for sale, and that was kind of a big deal. And so maybe that tide has started turning.
For sure. And Amita, if I could go to you, just in general, what is it about the difference between renting and owning and that sort of building wealth aspect of ownership that is so important to people?
That is huge. That is a source of so much security for people. I, several years ago, had done a story on people who rent versus people who own, and I had interviewed a guy who said that he has his kids come to him constantly, basically saying, you know what, we love you, Mom and Dad, but God, we need help in buying a home. And it sure would be nice if we could move our families in with you. We've done a ton of stories here where we have families living together, different generations of families living together to save. And I think, you know, the families who have moved in with their parents are more willing to pay a small amount of rent to their parents because they're keeping the wealth in the family. And in terms of inheriting wealth, I can say that, you know, my mom and dad bought 4 houses when I was growing up on a very, very tiny income, right? I would never in my lifetime be able to buy 4 homes, but I and my sister will inherit those homes, and that helps build generational wealth for me and my children and their children. So again, it is huge. And for the people who can barely get by paying rent, and have no chance to buy a home, they are suffering greatly because they can't even begin to build generational wealth.
Right, and that generational wealth is really a sense of financial stability long term, isn't it?
Yes.
Well, we'll go to another question here. Now, so how does one represented by a Democratic legislator get an effective message to congressional Republicans to do your job and not let an autocrat run roughshod over you and everyone else? Jamie, if I could go to you, how would you propose people sort of reach out to some of these Republican legislators who they may not feel they're represented by?
I mean, I think this may be oversimplification, but you can call their offices, right? All of their office numbers are listed online. They have people who are hired and paid to answer the phone. You can write letters. You know, I covered members of Congress as a political reporter in South Carolina, and I know that you know, they do read those messages, or at least that was my assumption and my understanding at the time. So, you know, social media is also a huge tool for people to get their message out and to be heard, and it certainly has its drawbacks and creates major problems for us, but it can also be a huge tool of democracy, right? People can have power through spreading an effective message on social media. So, you know, getting together, organizing is another way to be effective.
Absolutely. We can move on to another question here, another one about housing, or in general about cost of living. So this commenter asks, why is everything more expensive? Why is the cost of living so high? Why do taxes increase, making it unlivable? And why aren't local politicians bringing down the cost of living instead of raising it? Scott, if I can go to you, your team has done a lot of reporting on cost of living. What can you say about some of the efforts to bring that cost of living down here in San Diego?
Well, the why is easy. There's a lot of demand for a low supply of things, whether it's housing, whether it's parking, whether it's, we went through this incredible economic sort of tumultuous period where we had a high demand for products, and then our supply chain was shut down with COVID, and that created this, once 100 years type of inflationary pressure. And then dealing with that, we pumped a lot of money into the system as well, and it got pretty high. And now, local governments are facing the same problem because their costs are going up. They have to pay their employees more. Everything from their trucks to their materials are going up, and so their costs are rising, and they want to pay people more. And yet their money from the federal government, from all of the economic activity, just isn't making up the difference. And so they tried to raise sales taxes in the city of San Diego. That failed by just 3,000 votes. And so now they've decided to raise parking revenue, to raise user fees, to do all kinds of things. And so, we have a cost of living committee at the city council that has done a lot to raise the costs of the community, but they've also responded by trying to raise the minimum wage and other things, which will itself have an inflationary effect on things. So we're in a tough sort of cycle of all of those costs going up and the demand for things going up. They have added a lot of supply of housing, which has seemed to have some effect on the rent, but it's nowhere near what they need to sort of reestablish that feeling of security that a lot of people feel like they lost.
Yeah, and if I could just jump in,
of course,
not to interrupt you, but I interviewed Chris Cate recently. He's the head of the San Diego Regional Chamber of Commerce, and we talked about tariffs. And I think, Jamie, you alluded to this in our last half-hour segment, but businesses have been holding off on passing down the costs of tariffs to consumers, but no more. Not just across the country, but here in San Diego. He's hearing that now they are going to pass along those costs. So everything that we have outlined in terms of the financial pain on San Diego consumers is only going to intensify.
Well, that's absolutely an impactful reporting that we've all done. And Amita, with Project 2025 as well, how are some of these financial efforts by the federal government impacting things like cost of living here in San Diego?
Well, it's like on every level. We've had a lot of federal employees who have lost their jobs. So they are unemployed, searching for new employment. When inflation is going up and you're unemployed, that makes life very, very difficult. Just in general, there's so much financial uncertainty in the air. There's so much political uncertainty in the air. That alone makes you not want to spend. And when you don't spend, we are an economy based on spending. When you don't spend, there are reverberations across the economy. So businesses suffer, restaurants suffer, grocery stores suffer. It affects all of us.
Absolutely. Well, another impactful part of the cost of living is housing, as we've mentioned. And Jamie, I'm going to go to you with this question if you can. So another commenter asks, it seems like there's a tremendous amount of construction going on related to big unit housing projects. Now, that's definitely true if you look around at most of the developments that are going on in San Diego. What have your reporters, your team uncovered about maybe why that's sort of the focus of construction here in San Diego?
I think, the reporting has shown that big unit construction, you mean like multi-housing projects?
A building that has lots of
Yes.
units in it, 100 or more units, the really large like block length developments that we see all over North Park and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that, we are not building enough units to meet the demand. And so the best way to build a lot of units is to build a big housing complex. I know that this is, really tricky in a place like San Diego, and I live in a neighborhood that is near downtown, and I have several of these popping up around town. And I've talked to neighbors, and the questions are, where are these people going to park, right?
Yeah.
And what's it going to do to the property values of the homes that are around it? And I think that those are really legitimate questions. I don't know what the solution is, except that we need more housing. And it certainly seems like building an apartment complex with, 100 units in it is a great way to get more units online. I do think that there are many more factors at play here that are going to determine affordability, however, right? Are we so far behind in producing supply that even when these units come online, will they in fact be affordable? I have wanted to look into what is someone paying for a mortgage that entered a mortgage, 20 years ago versus a renter of a similar home in San Diego. I'll hazard a guess that the renters may be paying a lot more.
Probably double, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's worth remembering, like, over the last 25 years, we've added a tremendous number of jobs. We've added population, even though the population projections are going to, cap out at some point. But we have not even come close to the number of units. A job is a house. Like, you need. They come together.
Right.
And if you don't build them, then you see the situation we're in right now. So you see a lot of construction, and it is very prevalent, but it's not even close to catching up from what's gone on. The real, I think, we'll all have to pay attention to how far it can go. And we're watching this, like, sort of refurbishment of San Diego from this, suburban style entity or city to a walkable urban community. And in some areas that's gone well. And in other areas, it's going to be really awkward for a while because the transit's not there, but the development and density is coming. And which comes first? We can't sustain a transit system right now because it's not dense enough, but we're going to make the density, and there's going to be a 20-year awkward period between the old way and the new way. And it remains to be seen whether we're going to get through that well and whether we're going to design the city well in the meantime. And but that's what's happening because they've proactively discouraged, and the new Board of Supervisors is proactively discouraging more development in the backcountry and the unincorporated areas, which means that it has to go into these urban and cities that already exist.
And rightly so, though, in terms of fire risk, right?
Fire risk, climate change activists talk about what the car and what these long commutes do. But, on the other hand, if we keep them from building in those areas, it's pretty well documented people are going even further. I talked to a guy who just moved to San Diego, and he's moving to Riverside County. And that's maybe he won't come down that often, but that's a long drive, and that has a major impact on his quality of life, on the emissions that his car will emit, and all that. And so, but that's always going to be the balance. You shut things down, they're going to go somewhere. If you don't build units in rich areas, the rich people find homes. It's the people farther down the ladder that will get pushed out.
And I wonder how far they will be pushed out. You mentioned Riverside County. That used to be the place that everyone went to afford housing. I grew up there, but now housing is becoming out of reach there. So talking about, all these apartments that have gone up that are not affordable rent-wise, and of course the cost of a home is not affordable. Where do the people go who make a middle class or lower income living, who are working 3-4 jobs? Where do they go? They are providing services. Where do they go? Where do they live?
I have parents of children at my children's school who rent one-bedroom apartments and they have 4 people in their family. And there are a lot of reasons to do that. You stay in the neighborhood that you're familiar with, so you're not disrupting your kids' lives by moving. You are locked into rent. Of course, it grows at 5% plus inflation, capped at 10, which is more than inflation. More than inflation. But those are incentives to kind of stay and just make it work, right? They're making it work for them.
But then it becomes a question of quality of life. How great is your quality of life if you are like 4 or 5 people crammed into a 1-bedroom apartment?
Yeah. Well, and that tension between building and people who want to keep their neighborhoods the same, and then that quality of life question, and maybe living in a place where you can still access schools and amenities, those are all things that we're going to be continuing to cover here at the Public Matters Initiative, and I think that's all the time we have for this Q&A. I want to once again thank our panelists, KPBS Public Matters Investigative reporter Amita Sharma. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Scott Lewis from Voice of San Diego. Thank you so much. And Jamie Self from iNewsource.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Once again, if you have questions or if you weren't able to get to, we have all the answers available online at kpbs.org. Once again, I'm KPBS social media host Jake Gatta. Thank you all and have a good day.